Although the American Civil War has generated an enormous amount of scholarly inquiries and popular histories, even prompting American academia and the general public to refer to it simply as the Civil War, it has only been recently, approximately in the past 30 years, that scholars have begun serious application of just war theory to the Civil War. Just war theory attempts to rationalize on a moral basis when wars ought to be fought and how warfare ought to be waged. As America's most destructive war in terms of the human and material cost, the Civil War also exhibited remarkable restraint in comparison to other conflicts across time and space, making such studies historically and morally significant. The topic I plan to pursue for my dissertation is thus an application of moral philosophy to history, that of just war theory to the American Civil War. Major questions that have been debated by historians related to the topic include most significantly whether the war was a just war, the degree of violence, especially differences between the Eastern and Western theaters and Northern and Southern armies, and the general escalation of the conflict from its limited to total war nature, shifting fighting from soldiers on the battlefront to civilian property on the home front. Charles Royster in The Destructive War, William Tecumseh Sherman, Stonewall Jackson, and the Americans, published in 1991, argued that the aggressive war envisioned by General Thomas J. Jackson of taking the fighting northward into Pennsylvania to destroy key industries and infrastructure, disrupt commerce in major cities, and make the enemy feel the hard hand of war was later carried out by General Sherman during his campaigns in Mississippi, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Mark Grimsley in The Hard Hand of War, Union Military Policy Toward Southern Civilians, published in 1997, split the war into three periods, though in a general and not absolute divide. The first was the attempted policy of conciliation from April 1861 until June 1862, the second that of pragmatism from July 1862 until January 1864, and a hard war policy from February 1864 until the end of the war. Harry Stout in Upon the Altar of a Nation, A Moral History of the Civil War in 2007 applied just war theory to the Civil War through a moral history of warfare, particularly through a study of how ministers and preachers understood and justified their respective sectional causes. Yet, in his broad overview of the topic, his particular focus was on the development of America's new civil religion. Aaron Sheehan Dean and Why Confederates Fought, Family and Nation in 2009 explored a targeted case study on why Virginians came to support the Confederacy. D.H. Dilbeck in A More Civil War, How the Union Waged a Just War in 2016 looked into how the Union rationalized their just cause and how federal armies waged warfare, demonstrating both strategies of destruction and a concern for restraint in carrying those strategies to completion. Dean undertook a broader study in his The Calculus of Violence, How Americans Fought the Civil War, published in 2018. He argued that the war was not either restrained or violent, but rather both, representing the conflict's complicated nature. He especially explored contentious subjects that could have made the war much worse, including guerrilla warfare, emancipation, the treatment of prisoners, and occupation policies. Unlike most historians, he also argued that the limited to total war paradigm mischaracterizes the conflict, since this was not true throughout all localities. Although Eric Patterson in Just American Wars, Ethical Dilemmas in U.S. Military History, published in 2018, noted the impacts that Halleck and Francis Lieber had on the future developments of just war theory, including the Hague and Geneva Conventions. Possibly because of the sharp divide between Americans during the Civil War, he did not include the Civil War as a case study within his work. Despite the recent scholarly inquiries, there are a number of questions that remain, related in part to major historiographical issues. In relation to jus ad bellum, translated from the Latin as just cause for war, what was the perceived justice or injustice of secession, stemming from the founding era to the antebellum period to the final outbreak of hostilities? An unexplored question relating to how the war is fought, in Latin jus in bello, what is the comparative justice in the similarities and differences in the conduct of campaigns in enemy territory? Two particular campaigns that I want to compare are Lee's Gettysburg Campaign and Sherman's March to the Sea. Interpretations of Sherman's campaign in Georgia have largely shifted from contending that Sherman inaugurated modern total war, as seen, for example, in John Benton Walter's article, General William T. Sherman and Total War, published in 1948. to arguing that Sherman was largely a traditional general and his march was simply an operational movement, as expressed by Wesley Moody in his 2011 work, Demon of the Lost Cause. Interpretations of Lee's Gettysburg campaign in Pennsylvania have shifted too, from the contention that the operation was a prime example of respecting private property, such as Lee's biographer Douglas Southwell Freeman espoused in R.E. Lee, published in 1934, to arguments that Lee's campaign was similar to federal campaigns in the South, including abuses against private property, as seen in Jason M. Frawley's dissertation, Marching Through Pennsylvania, The Story of Soldiers and Civilians During the Gettysburg Campaign, written in 2008. Mark Grimsley and D.H. Stillbeck and specifically focused on how the Union interpreted and applied just war principles. But there has not been a similar work from the Confederate perspective, leaving certain questions unanswered, such as, although the Federalists produced Halleck and Lieber's works on the laws of war, what works and teachings influenced Confederate conduct and justification of war? Another unexplored inquiry that is an important question today in the nuclear age is how the new advances in the weaponry in the war were viewed as justified or not, including, for instance, the use of snipers, mines, and submarines. One more question is how religion, particularly the Christian faith, impacted one's views on what is a just war and how a just war should be waged. In sum, such an application of just war theory to the American Civil War would uncover significant historical insights to the outcome of the conflict and moral understandings of restraint in the waging of war and the conduct of the fighting.